السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لعلها عثرات الفشل في الحياة هي التي أدت إلى اندفاعة النجاح والتألق والتميز، حتى بات قامة علمية مرموقة في العالم الغربي ابتداء واليوم في عالمنا الإسلامي. هو البروفيسور سامي إيرول غالامبيه، عالم الرياضيات والكومبيوتر والمهندس، يحدثنا أكثر من الداخل عن بعض إنجازاته والمفاصل في حياته وعن تكريمه الأخير. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. سامي إيرول غالامبيه نابغة من تركيا في الحقل العلمي، ويشغل كرسي دانيس جابور بمرتبة أستاذ في قسم الهندسة الكهربائية والإلكترونية في الإمبيريال كوليدج في لندن. متخرج من جامعة الشرق الأوسط التقنية في أنقرة تركيا، وحائز على درجة الدكتوراه من معهد البوليتكنيك في نيويورك، وعلى درجة دكتوراه العلوم من جامعة بيير وماري كوري في باريس. غالامبيه هو أحد مؤسسي مجال نظام الحاسوب وتحليل أداء الشبكة، وهو معروف أيضاً باختراع الشبكات العصبية العشوائية وشبكات جي أو شبكات غالامبيه. وقد نشر 2 من كتبه ال4 باللغات الإنجليزية والفرنسية والكورية واليابانية. انتخب ليكون عضواً في الأكاديمية التركية للعلوم والكلية الهنغارية للعلوم والأكاديمية التكنولوجية في فرنسا وأكاديميا يوروبيا، وحصل على شهادات فخرية من جامعات عالمية في أوروبا وتركيا، وخرج أكثر من 50 مهندسا ومهندسة، ومن ضمنهم عدة عالمات في مجال علوم الحاسوب. حاز غالامبيه على جوائز تقنية عديدة، ومنها جائزة الإنجاز مدى الحياة عام 2008. البروفيسور إيرول غالامبيه هو اليوم يكرم لإنجازاته بحصوله على جائزة المصطفى المرموقة للعلوم والتكنولوجيا بدورتها الثانية مع زميله الأستاذ أمين شكر الله، عالم الرياضيات الإيراني الألماني، الذي عمل على مجموعة متنوعة من المواضيع بما في ذلك نظرية الترميز ونظرية التعقيد الجبري. لعلنا نميل دوما إلى النظر للاختراع والإنجاز، ولا نحاول النظر عميقا في شخص هذا المخترع الذي قام بهذا الفتح العلمي. الأستاذ سامي إيرول غالامبيه، عالم الكومبيوتر التركي-الفرنسي والمهندس الإلكتروني والرياضي التطبيقي، وحاليا الأستاذ في الاتصالات الحاسوبية في الإمبيريال كوليدج في لندن، يعطينا لمحة أعمق عن نفسه ويحدثنا أكثر من الداخل عن بعض إنجازاته والمفاصل في حياته وعن تكريمه الأخير.
That's very complicated because you're asking people to talk about themselves, and this is introspection, which is the hardest activity that you can imagine, even much harder than research. Much even harder than research. In my career and life, I've pursued, interestingly enough, subjects which attracted me. So I wasn't pushed by the subject that was imposed upon me, but rather pushed by the subject that I had imagined and which attracted me. And from the very beginning, I was interested in systems which are quite complex, which involve a lot of interconnected parts. So the interconnection of the parts is due to the communication between the parts. And each of the parts of these systems is carrying out some local function and then exchanging data, information with the other parts through the interconnections. This is exactly what today's computer systems are. They are very large, very interconnected. Even if they are in a room, they're made up of different components which are all interconnected. And each of these components actually may be working with different technologies, therefore at different speeds and different energy usage. and with different performance levels. So my work has been to take such very complex systems and to develop ways that allow you to understand how they will behave in the future. Because you can observe right now how things are going on, but what will happen 10 minutes, 50 minutes,
exactly.
5 days later? So you have to develop this through mathematics to do this prediction. Now, when you do these mathematical models with their predictions, you also have to validate them. So you have to take what the mathematical model is saying, and you have to be able to compare it to reality. The originality of my work is that I have simultaneously the scientific aspect based on mathematics, and I have the practical aspect, which comes often 10, 25 years before it actually goes into practice.
Now, what about how many patents have you
I don't have many
licensed?
patents. I have few patents because I don't take, my job is not to take patents and to get some kind of profit. I don't do that. I only do a patent if some industry is interested in doing the patent.
Since you won the award, okay, are you going to put forward any kind of patents?
Well, I have, I do patents if needed. My purpose is not to do patents. I do patents if needed. If I'm collaborating with some industry and they say, we would like to patent this, I will say fine and we will patent it. But my purpose is not to
so you're not into entrepreneurship?
Not at all. I'm not at all into entrepreneurship. My successes in terms of practical reality are several. I've had perhaps 6, 7 significant successes. But these successes, if you take, interestingly enough, today people talk about entrepreneurship. But if you look at the reality, only 1 out of 10 attempts at entrepreneurship are successful in technology. Okay? And if I had done, if I have had, say, 6, 7 outcomes which are used, it means I would have normally done 60, 70 companies.
Right.
Which is not what I'm interested in doing.
Okay.
I'm interested in the research, I'm interested in educating students.
And you leave this for others to pursue?
And I leave this for others. I will help them. So I will help people who want to do this from my ideas. But I'm not there to do this myself.
You're talking about matters, and you talked about the complexity of the first stage of trying to put something forth. But is this how your life is? Your other life? Away from the research?
Well, it's interesting
academia.
because I've been in many different places, right? But interestingly
in
enough...
the 4 directions?
Yes, I've been in different ways, not in my personal life, but certainly in my career. I've been in different countries, and people say, why did you change? And my answer is quite simple. To change, I have to have an offer. I don't go somewhere and say, please take me. Okay. So I move if someone makes me an offer. Right? And if the offer is better and more interesting than what I have, then I may accept it. I mean, if the place is good, if the environment is fine, if the lifestyle is good, if my family finds this a good idea, then I will do it. Otherwise, I won't. So when I've changed, it's really because I was made an offer. So when I came to Imperial College, I did not ask to come to Imperial College. I never even applied to come to Imperial College. They contacted me and said, we would like to offer you a position. Would you consider this? And then they said, come to London and we will talk about the conditions to understand what you want.
So you were always on the move then?
Not always. I never move every 3 years. I mean, I've moved every, say, 5, 10 years. Or sometimes 20 years.
But trying to adapt to a new society,
trying to adapt is good.
A new milieu.
That's very good. That's I think there's no harm to that. I didn't know anything about the UK except having been there as a tourist before living in the UK in London. So it's possible to adapt to places.
Right.
So when I went back to the US, I went back because Duke University wanted me to be a department head.
Yeah, the chair.
So I went there. I mean, it was a very nice offer. It's a very good university. It's a top 8, top 6 university in the US. So that was very interesting. It was a nice challenge. And at that point in time, I had spent 20 years in Paris. And it looked reasonable to try something interesting, etc. And then we stayed a total of 10 years in the US, essentially because we thought that the US was fine to work and so on, but this is not where we wanted to die.
Exactly, exactly. God forbid. Now, okay. Now, you said something actually that most of my successes, and I'm quoting you, have been driven by failure. What was the failure that surged you up to this loftiest point of scientific?
When I say all successes, when you start doing something, you work on something, and you are yourself dissatisfied with the outcome. I can give you an example from many, many years ago. I was working at that time, very young, must have been 21, something like this. I was working on my master's project. And I was very frustrated. I was not getting what I had come up with some idea myself, and I couldn't make progress. I felt that I was not doing very well. This was my idea what I was doing. But my professors, they were looking at this differently. And they asked me to give a presentation in front of a group of visiting professors who were there to evaluate the department. And I was quite surprised because I was a very young master's student. Typically, you have to have a PhD or more to be invited in this situation. So I went and gave my presentation to this group of professors. In this group of professors, there were several people. One of them was actually an Iranian professor, Lotfi Asgarzadeh. Lotfi Asgarzadeh was at that time professor at the University of California at Berkeley, and for many years, he just died last year, actually this year, unfortunately. And for many years, he was a very influential person. And sure enough, what happened, because I gave that presentation, and he liked it so much, to me it was a failure, what I had done. To him, it looked impressive. And as a result, I got my first academic position. So directly, 2 years later, I finished my PhD, and he himself contacted me and said,
so you thought that this was a failure, and then it was a story of success.
When you think it's a failure, you work so hard to improve it, that actually, without your being aware, it has become a success.
Allow us, sir, to stop now for a short break, and then afterwards we're going to talk a bit more about science and technology and how they are interrelated, and about the cyber security, but after the break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. الأستاذ سامي إيرول غالامبيه عالم الكمبيوتر التركي-الفرنسي والمهندس الإلكتروني والرياضي التطبيقي، وحاليا الأستاذ في الاتصالات الحاسوبية في الإمبيريال كوليدج في لندن، يشرح التأثير المباشر لاختراعه المميز الذي منح على أساسه جائزة المصطفى على الحقل العلمي، وفي أي مرحلة تطبيقية أصبح هذا الإنجاز اليوم.
So, with respect to science, it has, first of all, these G networks are not just new tools. In the scientific structure of such models, it was the first time that models that contained something called strong nonlinearities could include something else called product forms. Now, what does product form mean? It was in my speech yesterday. It means that you have a very complex system, but you can solve it as a combination of its parts.
Right.
That you can get solutions that make believe that it is made of parts that do not interact. Okay? And this is called a product form result. I'm explaining it in a little bit simplified way. So G networks was a breakthrough in mathematical models in general, where these kinds of interactions were nonlinear, and yet the results were exact. So this separation into parts of the solution is not some kind of approximation, which is already known in physics as a mean field approximation. It's an exact result about these networks. So the formulas are exact formulas. They're not approximate. They exactly describe what the state of the mathematical model is. But it was the first time that in these systems we had interactions which were based on decomposed parts with an exact result, despite strong nonlinearities. The second interesting development of this work from a purely scientific perspective was that before that, these decomposable systems that could be analyzed as parts, were so-called reversible systems. That means that if you change the direction in time, they look like each other. You go forward in time or backward in time, they look very much like each other. Now, in this particular case with the G networks, the backward and forward is very different. So you don't have this back-forth relationship, and yet you have this very interesting property of being able to decompose the parts. So in that respect, it was scientifically very novel. The second aspect with the random neural network, let me mention that. What is the RNN? What is novel? The novelty is that if you take previous models of brain-like systems, they all have solutions, ways of solving, okay, which cannot be predicted in the long run if the system has feedback. That means this neuron talks to that one, but that one, perhaps through someone else, talks to the first one. This is a feedback loop. Okay? So if you have a feedback loop, before these models, systems with feedback loops had no exact solution. With the RNN, systems with feedback loops, which is the real way our brain is structured, all parts communicate. They're not A talks to B, A talks to B, B talks to A, but B talks to C, C talks to A, and so on. So these parts are communicating in loops. And then B says, oh, because A told me this, I have to change what I'm doing and adapt to what A has told me, and then does something else, and A watches this and says, well, now you have to change it again, and so on. So you have these feedback loops in brain-like systems. And so in the random neural network, it was the first time in all scientific development that these systems with feedback could have an exact solution of a mathematical type that we are actually using, that we have used in many algorithms and also in applications in neuroscience.
Right. Now, how are science and technology interconnected or interplay in this sense?
Science is something which is true independently of technology. So the speed of light is something which is true whether you use a fiber optics of this kind, or fiber optics of that kind, and so on. So the notion of the speed of light, which I mentioned in my introduction, this is independent of how you do things. The speed of light between you and me is going to be the same if we change rooms. Or if we if I all of a sudden become red in my face, the speed of light is still the same. Okay? On the other hand, technology depends on what human beings know how to do right now. So all of technology has a date to it.
Okay.
And in fact, not only is it very impossible to do the technology of tomorrow with the machines of today, it is also extremely difficult to do the technology of yesterday with the machines of today.
Right.
Because we don't have the same materials, we don't have the same know-how. For instance, many ceramics that are used in the mosques in Istanbul, these ceramics today, you cannot produce them. Even though today we know much more about ceramics, simply because we don't have the secrets, the technologies of that time.
That they used to do it with.
Right. So technology is very time dependent, while science is time independent.
Now, as a laureate of the Mustafa Prize of 2017, what did this prize, what kind of standing does this prize have for you?
The question is not A gets a prize.
Exactly.
The question is, what is the prize for? The prize is not for me. The prize is to encourage others to develop a certain level of activity and a quality and a relevance. This is the purpose of the prize. And when there is a prize like that, it encourages not one, not two, but thousands of people. Perhaps in my area there may be 10,000s, 100,000s of people working.
Especially in the Islamic and Arab world.
Well, not just there, but all over the world.
Yes,
Arab true. World. But if you look at the number of people working in such areas, there are literally hundreds of thousands of people working. So you're there, the prize is there, not to inspire me. It's too late. I will do what I'm doing, and I have done what I did. It is to inspire the others.
Right. Before we end our interview, I would appreciate if you can tell us a bit, perhaps you can shed light on the notion of a cyber warfare. We've been hearing a lot about cyber attacks happening here and cyber attacks happening there, and anonymous coming and declaring that, well, we are responsible for this. How dangerous is a cyber warfare, and what are the security precautions since you've been working on this?
So a lot of cyber attacks are based on really understanding the details of the functionings of the systems that are being attacked. Okay? So, in a certain sense, organizing a cyber attack is not any different from any engineering project, especially in the IT field. So it's very similar to that, based on intimate understanding of how to manipulate the software of existing systems.
Right.
Most attacks are like that. So in that sense, the defense against attacks is also very similar. You try to look at the system that's running or that you have designed and try to understand if you have left any ways for anyone else to come in and change its behavior in a negative way. If so, you try to modify that so that it won't happen. So both attacks and defense are based on the same ideas and the same techniques. Okay. Like now, because of this fact, it's a bit of a cat and a mouse game, except that the cat and the mouse are not necessarily the big cat and the small mouse, but it may be the big mouse and the big cat. Yeah, so they're balanced in a certain sense, and it's a game between different parties. So in that sense, it's a very dangerous activity. If we don't have, it's like anything else in technology, if you don't have regulations. For instance, when we eat something, we look at, there are certain things that are used in the food, and all of these have been tested and declared safe at a certain level. So if you drink 1 can of Coca-Cola, you're not really in danger. Of course, if you drink 100 cans of Coca-Cola, forget it. But if you remain at certain levels, it's okay. And I think what we lack in the cyber warfare and cyber security field is we lack regulations.
Right, sir. I have lots and lots of other questions, but I'm afraid that time has run short. Professor Sami Éirol غالامبيه, Turkish-French computer scientist, electronic engineer and applied mathematician, and you're currently also professor in the computer communications at the Imperial College in London. Many thanks indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting for me to talk to you.
You're always welcome, sir. It's our honor and our pleasure actually, sir, to host you on our show.
It's very kind of you. Thank you.
Always welcome, sir. إذن لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل. من كل فريق العمل من كل الميادين من طهران. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.